first film we are going to review is The Lovebirds, and it was originally scheduled to be in South by Southwest and in theaters, but now Netflix picked it up so we could all watch it. Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about this film?
So it's directed by Michael Showalter, who is known for a couple of things. I think he definitely wrote. I can't remember if he directed Wet Hot American Summer, kind of a comedy which has turned into a bit of a cult thing over the years. It wasn't particularly well regarded at the time, but the bigger hit recently was he was the director of The Big Sick, which also starred Kumail Nanjiani, who is the male lead here, along with Issa, and basically they play a couple who the opening scenes are basically the start of their relationship when they first met, and it's kind of like this new relationship bliss. It very quickly switches to 4 years later, where they're a little bit more jaded and bickering. And on the way to a friend's dinner party, basically they run over a guy who is on a bike, and their vehicle's then commandeered by somebody claiming to be a police officer, who then proceeds to kill the guy with their car. They then go on the run because they're worried about how it looks and it sounds ridiculous, and that's basically what you'll have heard and seen in the trailer. So basically it's a comedy, and it focuses on these two kind of going on the run, trying to solve the issue of who this guy was and why he was murdered, and the ability to exonerate themselves before the police catch up with them.
Who wants to go first? Did someone find that? I thought it was really funny. I laughed really hard. But Carice, why don't you go?
Yeah, absolutely. I watched this morning with a cup of coffee, and it couldn't have been a better sort of setting for this film. I thought it was funny. I thought it was the comedic moments came at exactly the right speed that you wanted them. You weren't fatigued. There weren't really any that fell flat. They were thought through. I thought the pacing of the film was great. It didn't really waste any time in just getting to what the premise was going to be, what the issue was going to be, what they were kind of up against. And I felt that the sort of out of nowhere observational comedy that they brought into it worked because of the state of shock that they were in throughout the film. So they, discuss really sort of mundane things like cigarette lighters in cars, and whilst sometimes with these films that have stand-up comedians acting in a film, it can often feel like they're shoehorning their material in, so they're given a moment to do a bit from one of their sets. It felt like there was a intelligent, thought through kind of comedian behind the lines, but it flowed with the kind of narrative of the film.
So I agree with Carice about the pacing. I think it was very well done. I mean, this is I don't think anybody's going to come out of this thinking it's the best. It's the best comedy ever, the best romantic comedy ever, or anything. I had a lot of fun with it, though. To be honest, I think it has quite a good script in the sense that it makes quite good use of callback gags. Like there's at least 2 or 3 in the film that I can think of, and they work quite nicely with when they come into the film. It also, I mean, it's doing that thing where it's taking a serious issue and it's making a comedy out of it. Now, the thing that actually struck me about this, and this is going to be a ridiculous comparison, I think, to anybody who has seen both films, and I'm pretty sure Carice has seen both films. It actually reminded me as if somebody took the pitch for Queen and Slim and made it into a romantic comedy, quite frankly. Because there's this issue about why they're not going to the police, right? Because Issa Rae is a black girl and Kumail Nanjiani is a person of color with Pakistani name, and it's just you get this. There are those bits woven through. It doesn't really focus on them, but it provides something to hang these jokes on, and I think it works quite well. I think there's very good chemistry between the two leads. I think, I mean, really, I'm quite fond of Kumail Nanjiani as a performer anyway. I enjoy him a lot in Silicon Valley. I thought he was excellent in The Big Sick. and various other things. The supporting performances are all quite good. I think it undercuts itself quite effectively late on in the film when things start to come to a climax. I think it's just a very enjoyable film. I don't think there's anything necessarily particularly new or imaginative about it, but I think it's just one of those instances where a good script that is well paced with some decent jokes comes together with very talented performers, and it makes something which is funny, but it's also quite smart at points. I think it's not, as I say, it's not you know. I can't imagine myself wanting to revisit this in years to come as like some sort of landmark, but it is a very well constructed piece of comedy, I think.
I'm afraid I'm gonna have to play the odd one out here because I think I laughed seriously once in the whole thing. There were many scenes that were quite agreeable. They were happening and they were quite nice, but I didn't find them funny at all. And I found the two performances essentially just had the same mode, which was to look at each other and over-explain things, and that was the joke often. And I wondered if there wasn't more to the script than just there wasn't more to the script to allow a different mode of performance. It was just that same mash note of over-explanatory comedy the whole way through, which I find kind of annoying. And but actually, where this is kind of interesting is that it looks in a way like a screwball comedy, because it's a comedy of remarriage in a way, and that's interesting. It's interesting to see that done between a black woman and a Pakistani man, because the screwball comedy is notoriously white as a genre, but then the film's politics kind of undermine that, because there's I would say, and no pun intended, there's a massive cop-out ending where they've done exactly as Jim has said about the I didn't think of the comparison to Queen and Slim, but it's an interesting one, where they hint at that sort of they hint at the seriousness of police oppression, and then decide, well, not really at the end, and that irritated me a lot.
This is maybe where we get into a little bit of like the discussion that me and Amanda had about like what a film is trying to do, though, to be honest. Because there is an element of like, because I personally quite like the fact that it hinted at it, because otherwise it would be this weird unspoken thing in the film, right? I mean that as soon as, like, you know, two white people find them and phone the police and it's the two of them, like, it's kind of the unspoken thing. It's the elephant in the room. Now, I think it's actually a pretty good thing to do, to acknowledge it and then try and weave some comedy in around it. You know, I mean, like, comedy has tried to look at these things many, many times over the years, and I think it's quite good it does that. The fact that it hints at it, I think this is where I come out more like how Amanda was when we were talking about films on the last show. It would be a completely different film if they went any harder on that. And I don't think this... Now, there is things you could do that would maybe take a satirical angle to it, but I think this film wasn't looking to be a satire. It was looking, to an extent, to be that screwball comedy that you've hinted at in that summary there. So, yeah, I take the point, but I think it would be a very, very different film if it went any harder on that aspect of it.
I, of course, agree with you, Jim, because I think that that's exactly my sort of my argument with Hollywood, which was perhaps not as well executed in terms of its attempt to show representation. But in this particular film, it's definitely representation's a very important part of the story, and by putting that right out there as a sort of like right there, it doesn't. It's not everything in the story. It's supposed to be a funny rom-com with two really amazingly funny comedians. I'm like a really big fan of Issa Rae's show on HBO, and I did like The Big Sick, but I have to say I kind of, maybe because I really like Issa Rae, liked this film slightly better. But it's just the chemistry between the two just made me laugh, and I sort of got the joke that, you know, people they're ridiculously fighting over things in really terrible situations, and sometimes those fights that you have with your partner are just absolutely ridiculous. And particularly this kind of trope of the date night film, or I think there was another one called Game Night, which I didn't see, but then it's playing with that, with these particular comedians and an interracial couple. I at least laughed pretty hard, and I didn't have to think too much about, just enjoyed being in their company.
Yeah, just as an aside, I'm glad you mentioned Game Night, actually, because that was the other film it brought to mind. Because I have seen that, and it is a bit like somebody gave the concept for Queen and Slim to the people who made Game Night. That's kind of how it felt to me. But yeah, it's that sort of pitch. I think it is going for that screwball thing, and I think it does it. I think it does it quite well. There are not every joke lands, but like fortunately, it's the type of film where there's another one along 2 minutes later to fill the gap. It's kind of that sort of mode. So for me, it worked. It worked very well. I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and I think also one of the things is like if it's a taste thing too. I mean, I don't know if I have a really weird affinity for rom-coms, like, and especially like, well, I can't take a plane right now, but on a plane or something. But this one was it's my expectations of a rom-com is that it doesn't need to necessarily be highbrow, but it needs to it needs to be a simple relationship story that's kind of explored in a funny way or something, and I thought it worked.
And I'm a big fan of rom-coms too, but this I hear all of the points and all, but I do think there's something off just on the level of, even on chemistry between them. I don't actually think that they're very good scene partners together, really. I feel like they're kind of shouting past one another as opposed to like interacting with the other actor. So I'm happy to disagree on this one, I think.
Have you seen The Big Sick, Mark?
I have, yeah.
How did you find the chemistry with Kumail Nanjiani and I forget the actor's name, but how did you find it in that? With
Zoe Kazan.
Yeah, Zoe Kazan. That's it.
Yeah. I enjoyed that. It's operating on a minor key, and it operates well and nicely on a minor key. But in the end, it kind of becomes a wee bit saccharine, and maybe the saccharine quality is built into the narrative because it has that kind of conclusion in real life. It's based on his own the story of how he met his wife, Emily Gordon. But I liked it on a minor key level, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing that was interesting to me, just looking back at the credits of the film, and perhaps could be a reason for anything that Mark's picking up on in terms of things not quite feeling right or sitting right, is that Issa Rae and Kumail Nanjiani don't actually have any writing credits on the film. So the film is written and directed by purely white men. And so for that fact, it surprises me that a lot of the race-related kind of jokes, particularly jokes, because it's maybe a lot easier to write something that hits the nail on the head in terms of race when you're writing, a factual monologue, but to write a joke that kind of pulls that the sort of tensions therein and actually sort of successfully makes people laugh for that is probably quite hard. So I mean, I don't know whether they don't have official writing credits, but they were there kind of workshopping. It felt to me like the story would have been written by the people who wrote the story, and that the two comedians have kind of come in and built their own lines and characters around it, but there is no evidence that points to that fact. So I don't know whether perhaps if they were to have had a greater input, assuming that they didn't, whether the on-screen chemistry would have kind of worked for everyone. For me personally, it did, and I actually, did make a note of the fact that they make a good duo. But yeah, I guess perhaps just like a nuance in their performances, not feeling completely comfortable in the roles that they were in.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree with you in the sense that perhaps we need to know more about, there are definitely, I knew they weren't writing it, where in fact with The Big Sick, I think Kumail had written it, and Issa Rae is certainly the writer and creator of her show on HBO. So it's not the same maybe, but it would be interesting to see, if that was part of it. I agree with you that the chemistry to me is something worth seeing again, perhaps with even a better film, perhaps with a film written by one of both of them, or the two of one of them. But I do think response has been a good one, that there's representation of a rom-com with this couple, and they're really great. I'd love to see more, is my point, and I think it serves. If some people have said, oh, it just deserves to be on Netflix, and I'm like, I don't think so. I think it was worth. I mean, it's fine. It's on Netflix.
Oh, I mean, it's a million times better. I mean, I'm sitting here saying I don't think it's a particularly memorable film, right? But you need to bear in mind, I'm not necessarily that predisposed to romantic comedies. It's a million times better than some of the stuff I've seen in theaters over the past 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's had we been in more normal times, it was perfectly deserving of a theatrical release, certainly as much as any other rom-com I've seen in the cinema over the past 2 or 3 years.
Well, it's on Netflix, so take a look and let us know what you think.